Oh, there we go. Okay, let me go ahead and turn off the recording really quick. We'll start. Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome you to futureofeducation.com presents. Tonight we're going to talk about students on homework. We're going to have a special guest coming in, Kathleen Cushman, and she's also going to have Honor Mormon. That's going to be the teacher of the students that will be on the panel as they are giving us their feedback on what they feel about what's purposeful homework. And let's go ahead and make sure everybody has a basic introduction to the online classroom a little bit, give you a little overview of some of the tools that are in here. You'll notice that in this upper window, let me get a slightly bigger one, in this upper window you'll see all of the different participant names, and you could use the scroll bar to go ahead and see it a little bit better. But better yet, you can actually change your layout entirely so that this window is long enough to see everybody, and your text chat window can be even longer. If you look up along the bar along the top, you'll see where it says File, Session, View, Tools, Window, and Help. Click on View and hover over where it says Layout. Switch it over to Wide Layout, and I think you'll find that it'll be more comfortable for you. You can see everybody that's in the room all at the same time, and you can see a whole lot of that chat all at one time. And believe me, once chat gets rolling, it flies by so fast that it's really helpful to have that larger window. Now, if you're on a smaller screen computer and you find that it's preferable to go back to the default, feel free to go back and hit the view and go to default. Oh, netbooks in particular. Sometimes they just don't quite have enough space for you to do the widescreen. But most of you are probably on desktops or laptops that have plenty of room for the wide. Okay, so now with the wide format, things are shuffled just a little bit, but you can see right where the text chat is. To participate in the text chat, just type in your message in the long bar that's at the bottom, then hit send, and that will send your message out to everybody. There's also a feature called directed chat, in which you can do the little down arrow if you want to send a message to a specific person. But don't forget to set it back to this room so that everybody can see the messages later that you want to send to the entire room. A little bit later, we'll have a time in which the participants will be able to jump in and get to ask questions and use a microphone if they would like to. And when the time comes, just use the hand raise button that you see up just under the participant info window with everybody's names. That will raise your hand, and we can in turn give each person the microphone one at a time. And to turn on your microphone, hit the little button that's down here. And you'll know that it's on because the microphone will go in the up position. And it will have a blue color and a green color around it, blue and yellow color around it to let you know that you're transmitting. Okay, and let's see, in a little bit, we're going to ask you where you're logging in from. And whenever you do so, you will find the tools along the whiteboard will be turned on for you, and you'll see the little tool set. And there's going to be looks like a blue stick with a little red wand, and that will give you a pointer tool. It's very much like the tool I've got right now that's directing your attention. And you'll be able to show us right where you are logging in from in this world. And before we get to that one, I'm pretty sure that's the next one, or it is, I want to give everyone an opportunity to realize why my voice doesn't sound the least bit like Steve Hargadon's voice. Pretty good reason for that. He's not able to be in tonight. He's at a conference, so he asked if I would jump in and run the tech tonight. And my name is Tammy Moore, and you may have had a chance to meet me a couple of different locations on, for instance, Classroom 2.0's live program on Saturdays. I do the closed captioning there, and I'm there pretty much every weekend. All right, so let's go ahead now. I'm kind of curious where everybody's logging in from. That's always one part I love to do. So here's your chance now. I want to turn on the tools. And you've got an opportunity to go ahead and grab up the tools and show us where you're logging in from. Sorry, I'm doing this one at a time. For some reason, whenever I try to do it outside of a breakout room, I find I have to do it one at a time. There we go. Just about button down there. There you go. So go ahead and show where you're logging in. I'll add mine on there too. Let's see, let me get a little dot one. If I can get the dot one. There we go. All right, looks like we have a lot of participants signing in from the United States, a few from South America, a few from over in Asia and Australia. And for a second, I thought I saw one flashing up in Canada. It might have just been trying to position it. And if you want to type into text chat the specific location, you can. It looks like Lima, Peru, New Jersey, Atlanta, Minnesota, Australia, New York City, Argentina, Hong Kong. I always love to see these international audiences. Manila, raining on the Hudson River, and Japan and Texas, and Appalachian, Ohio, Connecticut, China. There we go. Looks like a lot of places getting rain. Alrighty, so let's go ahead. Now we've had a chance to get a little bit of an introduction, at least as far as where everybody's logging in from. We'll go ahead and move on and find out a little bit about Kathleen Cushman, who's our special guest tonight. Sorry about this. Let me get one at a time. Most everybody else seems to be able to have tools to turn these off all one at a time, but I can only do that when I'm in a breakout room. Not quite sure why. Something to do with my computer setup, I guess. There we go. Got it all. Okay, tonight our guest is Kathleen Cushman. She's an educator and a journalist who has specialized in the lives and learning of youth for over 2 decades. In 2001, she co-founded the nonprofit What Kids Can Do. And under its auspices, she has since written 9 books in collaboration with diverse youth from around the nation. Cushman's latest book is Fires in the Mind, What Kids Can Tell Us About Motivation and Mastery. And on her blog, she facilitates a national conversation with educators and parents about motivation and mastery in schools and out. Support from MetLife Foundation makes this work possible, and we would like you to go ahead and welcome her. I've already seen a lot of applause taking place. And welcome her tonight. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Kathleen. Okay, Kathleen, take it away.
Thank you, Tammy. It's really wonderful to be here tonight. And actually, the star of the show tonight, the 2 stars of the show, are students. And this is one of the great pleasures I have in my work life, which is essentially all about interviewing students about their own lives and learning. Tonight, I turn to a school where various students, in fact, a whole group of 18 or 20 students worked with me on Fires in the Mind. You'll read their voices in Fires in the Mind, but tonight those students are now graduated, and so tonight I reached out to the International School of the Americas, which is it's part of the Northeast Independent School District in San Antonio, Texas. And I'd like to introduce now Catherine Cuellar, who's a senior there, grade 12, 17 years old, and Ian Flores, who is in grade 10, 15 years old, who very kindly agreed to join me on this really important subject of homework tonight. So I want to welcome both of you, Catherine and Ian. Now, my work for Fires in the Mind centered around the question, the driving question, what does it take to get really good at something? And almost all the students I asked came up with the answer pretty quickly that it takes practice. We all know that because it's all part of our folklore, our culture, is that you get better by practice. And yet we often don't take the time to think carefully about what really effective practice looks like. And since it was so important to think about that, I wanted to introduce our discussion tonight by an outline of what cognitive researchers, cognitive psychologists, call effective practice, which is deliberate practice. And on this slide now, I'm assuming that you can see the slide, is that correct? On this slide now are the elements that cognitive psychologists and researchers have defined as the kind of practice that works. So let's just go over them quickly before we start, because the students themselves have studied this and will be commenting on it as we go forward. Deliberate practice always has an express purpose. It's always geared to the individual. It always involves attention and focus. It requires repetition or rehearsal. It requires careful timing. It leads to new skills. And unfortunately, it's not inherently enjoyable. So those are the premises that we took to the students and I took up when we worked on Chapter 8 of Fires in the Mind, which is all about homework. And we asked ourselves whether homework itself lived up to those criteria. So I'm going to start by asking you in the audience to write in the chat just a few words that describe your own experiences with school homework when you were a student. Just describe the feeling tone of it, anything that describes your experience of your own homework when you were a student. And I'm really dying to see what you say. And the students, I hope the students can also look at this, because I'm going to get to you next. There weren't a lot of positive things coming in. Tedious, usually easy, too much, everyone does the same thing, busy work, boring, mundane. Oh no, tedious, one size fits all, voluminous, remembering, Jenny's remembering, not fun at all. One person said she loved it, never enough. And it taught me how to work and think, usually busy work, not useful. I'm going to ask Catherine, I'm going to introduce Catherine, who is a senior and who plays the cello and the guitar and is also on the soccer team. And I want to start by asking her about deliberate practice when it takes place outside of school. Catherine, can you tell us, please, you're a soccer player. Can you tell us what it feels like to do deliberate practice as a soccer player? And I'm going to switch back to the list there, but tell me, what kind of practice in soccer works best when there's a coach right there with you when you're at soccer practice outside? Are you on?
Yes, I'm here. I feel that since I'm a goalie, I'm actually the goalie for my team, I do a lot of dives that can potentially be very dangerous and can hurt me and injure me if I do them incorrectly. So when I was first learning how to perform and do these dives, I had to practice them over and over with my coach right by my side, making sure that I was doing it correctly and making sure that I was not getting lazy with them, and because of the simple fact that they were so dangerous. So I feel that if I were to go home and try to do this by myself when I didn't know how to do them, that I could have potentially gotten hurt, so I didn't feel confident going home and doing them by myself at that time without my coach there with me.
Catherine, that's really interesting, because essentially when you were practicing in your sessions with the coach, these things that had an express purpose, that were exactly what you needed to study, that involved a close amount of attention and focus, that required repetition and rehearsal, and that required really careful watching and probably careful timing. And it led to a new skill. And I'm wondering what the difference was when you were on your own practice. Do you ever practice soccer on your own, Catherine, without?
I do practice some skills on my own. I again, I'm a goalie, and so my foot skills are not as strong as the foot skills of my peers that are forwards on our team or play the field more than I do. So I can go home and practice my foot skills, like dribble 100 times with my right foot and maybe 200 times with my left foot, just because my right is my dominant foot, and I need to be on the same level with both my feet in order to be a well-rounded player, which is what our coach wants us to be. Especially since I'm a goalie, a lot of, I guess, stereotypes are that goalies don't really run all that much and that we don't really need to do a bunch of ball handling, but my coach really pushes the fact that we need to all be well-rounded players and know how to do things.
So, Catherine, when you're practicing without your coach there, you're describing a different kind of practice that works partly because you can do it on your own. And I'm looking for our list here. You can do it on your own. It is geared to what you need to and can practice on your own, and it has an express purpose. Does it involve a lot of attention and focus when you're practicing that footwork on your own?
Absolutely, it does. If I'm trying to get better at a certain foot skill and I'm not really giving it 100% effort and I'm just going through the motions with it, then I don't feel that what I'm trying to learn is going to stick with me. And so if I actually focus and give it 100% of the time, that the skill will come a lot faster than if I was just going through the motions with it.
It's interesting. When you talk about going through the motions, I'm looking at this element of deliberate practice that says it requires repetition or rehearsal, but it really requires very focused repetition, not rote repetition. If very often people assign a kind of rote repetition for homework, but that work that you're doing wouldn't move you ahead into new skills if you weren't really focusing, is what you seem to be saying. Am I correct?
Yes.
So I'd like to talk to Ian for a minute about his experience. And Ian is a 10th grader, and he plays the electric bass. And when he gets home at night, he told me he often just plays to relax. Ian, are you there?
I'm here.
Welcome. So when you get home and start playing around on your bass, is that something that you feel you're doing in order to get better at your bass skills, or are you just doing it to kind of chill and relax?
Well, when I play the bass at home, I do want to get better, but I also feel that it's something that I want to do because I want to do it, and it's something I find relaxing.
So do you think there's a difference between when you're trying to say, I know you really like Jimi Hendrix, and when you're trying to kind of practice something that you admire in a really good bass player like Jimi Hendrix, is there a difference between the way that you practice when you're just kind of playing and letting it all out, and that?
Yeah, like when I'm just playing to like let it out, what I often do is just play like whatever I have in my head at the time. Well, if I'm trying to like learn some new song or like a new part of a song, what I do is I have the music out in front of me, I'm looking at it, I'm figuring it out on the bass, and I'll oftentimes look at it, I'll listen to it on a CD or something.
So you're paying attention, you're focusing, and are you doing it over and over, the same thing over and over?
Yes, I'll often do the same thing over and over until I get it right, because it's something that I want to learn, and it's interesting.
Tell me, Ian, when you do that, is there a certain time that you can do it, and then you just can't? After that kind of time, it loses its effectiveness, and you have to stop or take a break?
I usually play for around like an hour, because after that amount of time I start to like almost get fed up with myself if I'm really messing up a bit. So after that amount of time, I just decide to put the bass down, calm down, maybe do something else, and if I want to come back to it, then I will.
And when you're working on some particular aspect of some passage or some technique that you want to get right, can you do it for an hour, or is it shorter for something like that?
I'll often do shorter when it comes to things like that, and I'll take like a break in between, and I'll do something else. Like I'll play another song, and then I'll go back to it just so I can get a different perspective almost.
So it's interesting. The things that these two students, Catherine and Ian, have told us really highlight something that deliberate practice is not. It's one thing deliberate practice is not is play. It's not when Ian plays on his acoustic bass or electric bass, he's playing, and when he's practicing. It's very, very different. It's also deliberate practice is not work. It's a kind of working at something, but it's not labor in the sense of gainful employment. And it's also not performance. When you're practicing something, you're not performing it. And as Catherine so rightly pointed out, it's not rote repetition that you don't have to think about. It's really a thing all of its own. So it's always been interesting to me to start with the things that students are so committed to and engaged with outside of school when we talk about this essential question, what does it take to get really good at something? So I always ask them first, what are they good at and what are they practicing outside of school? But we're here today to talk about homework, which is a lot like the same thing Catherine's doing when she goes home and practices her footwork without her coach there over and over again, paying close attention so that she can get to be a better goalie. And it also resembles what Ian does when he goes home and plays his bass, just small passages in a very intensive way, trying to make that work and move himself one step ahead. But now I'd like to move into the classroom and ask these students about the kind of practice that they like and don't like when it comes to academic homework. And what I ask the students in the book, and I'll ask Catherine and Ian the same question here, is to answer to fill out the rest of this sentence. I decide to do my homework when, and feel free to chime in if you're on the chat. This is what I asked them to complete this sentence. Let's start with Catherine, because you spoke. You haven't spoken for a bit. Catherine, when do you decide to do your homework and not to do your homework?
I decided to do my homework when it's something that, a certain lesson that I understand for the most part, but I still need practice on. For instance, in math class, if we have equations that I don't understand. I'm in calculus this year, actually, and we were learning about derivatives. And at first, I didn't really understand how we got to the derivatives because there was a lot of equations that you had to plug into a bigger equation. So I would go home and practice a bunch of different examples of the problems, and the repetition of getting through the steps and getting through the whole plugging in the equations made it a lot more, it was easier to understand it after I did it multiple times to see the whole process again.
So again, looking at our list here, it required repetition or rehearsal from you. It required a lot of attention and focus. It had an express purpose for you. Was it geared to what you needed to do? Was it geared to your individual needs, Kathleen?
Yes, actually it was. I understand, well, some of my friends got it easier than I did, and some actually didn't understand it as well as I did at the time. And for me specifically, that's what I needed to go home and do, and I know that some of my friends needed to stay in tutoring for a while to even understand what a derivative was, and some of my other friends didn't need to practice as much as I did because they understood the steps that went into it. So specifically for me, that's what I went home and did.
And was that okay with your teacher that you were all doing different things?
Absolutely. All of our teachers are really great, and they all provide tutoring times on a certain schedule that they call office hours. And my math, especially math teachers here, they're really, really understanding when it comes to how different students understand different things at different levels and at different rates than other students do.
So they give you assignments that are geared to you.
Not necessarily. They give us all the same homework. However, some students they do allow students to come in and get extra help on that homework, and then for the students that it's easier for, they can do the homework a lot easier than us.
I'd like to ask Ian, the other question is, when do you decide not to do your homework, Ian? Can you give me an example of a time when you just, it's not worth it to you to do your homework?
Yeah, like, especially when I've been doing homework, like, really late for the last couple nights, and it's just got to the point where I'm starting to get headaches from, like, lack of sleep. It gets to the point where I see another homework assignment, and it's just, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to get some sleep, and if I get a 0, or if they get angry at me for not doing homework, then, you know what, I'd rather, you know, get sleep than have to do my homework and have a headache during the day.
So does that seem unfair to you that you're going to get a 0 for something in order to take care of your personal health? Ian? I'm just wondering. Go ahead. Does it seem unfair?
Well, it kind of does, yes. It seems unfair, but on the other hand, yes. There's the time delay. Okay. It does seem slightly unfair that I'm going to get a 0 because of, you know, yeah, I've been up late doing other homework. But on the other hand, I understand that sometimes, you know, there are things that need to be learned, and if I can't do them, I guess there are consequences.
So you think that teaching strategy might need to be re-examined if people can't do the homework because of, can you imagine something teachers could do to make that better? For example,
yeah, like if a teacher, yes, if a teacher, you know, for instance, looked at the other schedules, the other homework that the other teachers are assigning, then perhaps it would be better for all the students because
that's a strategy that you're suggesting for teachers?
At the same time.
So Ian is also a debater, and
yes.
I know you're a debater, and when you're practicing, when you're doing your homework for yours, it's actually a speech class, isn't it, that you study oral interpretation, where you practice doing public speaking of public recitation
yes.
of short stories, poems, essays, dramatic interpretation, humorous interpretation. Can you talk a little about what you're practicing right now for that?
Right now I am practicing a piece that takes a humorous interpretation of death, because he's in a mental institution, because he doesn't want to be death anymore, he wants to have a life.
And so can you describe to me how you do that? And I'm going to put up my list of deliberate practice so we can look at it while you're describing it.
We often do things in school, like we'll do small drills for these things, but if there's especially a part that I'm messing up on or I need to practice more, I'll do is I'll go home and I'll do this
So
part.
it has an
I'll
express
say
purpose that you're working with. It's geared to you. It involves attention and focus. It requires repetition, right? Or rehearsal, really. And do you feel as if it's leading to new skills?
Yes. Yes, I do. I feel that in learning how to act on stage or in front of a crowd, you are better able to control what you say in front of other people and how you act.
You haven't really addressed this question of whether it's enjoyable, if you ever enjoy doing a piece of homework like that. Is it ever enjoyable to you, anything that you do for homework?
The debate itself, that's pretty fun because it's an interesting activity. You have to act out, and then you have to speak, and you have to get all these things right. I also find that some English assignments can be fun because of the way you have to interpret the reading and put this in a certain way. But I find that most math assignments, science, often tend to be drills, repetitions.
So I'm going to switch back to Catherine now and ask you if there's ever been a kind of homework that you really just actually enjoyed. Because it's not a rule that deliberate practice has to be unenjoyable. It's just not inherently enjoyable. So if it's no fun, it doesn't mean it's no good necessarily. Can you talk about any kind of homework you ever had that actually was stimulating to you and that you were actually pleased that you were doing, Catherine?
I've gotten a few projects in different classes that we've had that are really, really hands-on because I'm a very hands-on learner. And so some projects that we've done, for instance, last year in world history, we did this in-class project where 2 years ago in world history, we did this in-class project where we had to draw out a settlement basically on a piece of butcher paper. However, we were given a certain area, and my teacher just kept naming out things to put in, like 50 houses, and then we'd have to put in 4 churches, and then we'd have to put in 5 schools, and then another 100 houses. And so I think that was really cool just to see how the activity that we were doing was helping us learn, exactly how busy and how crammed Europe was in the late 1700s, and it was just really interesting that she put it in a certain format that we got to decide where everything went, and then at some point everyone was just getting really stressed out because there was no room left on the paper, but we still had to fit everything left. So I think that some projects
is homework more fun
can be really beneficial and really actually very fun.
Should that be a criterion for a really good homework assignment?
I definitely love group projects. I'm very social and I love working with my peers, especially when we have similar interests. So I also like working with peers because it gives you a different look and perspective on what you're focusing on and what you're learning. So I would definitely, especially in math and science classes, like to have.
I'm going to ask both Ian and Catherine to comment on whether homework in these 4 R's, it tells you the reasons that you might have effective homework. But it would help if teachers put at the top of every homework assignment the purpose that you were, the reason that you were being given this homework. And if they possibly were to just list it right up at the top, that this is why you're doing this homework. And any other comments you want to make about these 4 R's that the other students who collaborated with me on this book came up with. One of them, of course, is it gets you ready for new learning. That sounded like what you were describing, Catherine. Either one of you on this.
Absolutely. I think collaborating and collaboration in small groups and in projects in high school can actually get you ready for college level work and even projects in the workplace where you have to collaborate with coworkers or your peers on different things, where you have to know how to communicate with each other in a way that you both understand what you're doing.
A lot of the students that talked to me said that they really resented doing homework if they didn't see the purpose. And in fact, often they just said, I don't see the purpose. The same kind of thing actually that I'm seeing in the chat at the beginning there when people remembered their own student homework. They just said it was pointless. I want to pull up this other slide on which this replicates something in Chapter 8 of our book, where the students contrasted deliberate practice with homework. And perhaps, Ian, you want to comment a little on some of these contrasts, that deliberate practice has an express purpose, but with homework, students often said they didn't know the point.
Like with homework, it's often things that we see as not something we're going to use in everyday life. With deliberate practice, we can say, all right, we play an instrument, we're going to have to do these scales, and if we, especially if we enjoy doing something, we're going to need to do this so we can do it well. But with homework, especially, say math, you're looking at geometry, and you're thinking, when am I going to need to know how to get the circumference if I'm not going to take a job in a math field?
One of your English assignments was reading Hamlet, and that you felt as if you could really see the purpose of reading Hamlet before you went into class to discuss it the next day. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have gotten, for the past few weeks, we've gotten certain reading assignments that we have to go home and do, and we read a certain part of the book before the class, the class after, and then during that class period, our teacher basically helps us dissect the literature and helps us understand what Shakespeare's saying, because Old English doesn't really come very naturally to all of us. So together as a class, with the things that we've read, it helps us to to better understand what our teacher is helping us dissect. So if some of our peers haven't read, it's kind of it's at a disadvantage to them that they're not at the same level as us, and they don't understand quite what we're talking about because they haven't gotten to that point in the book
homework
yet.
Deliberate practice. The bottom thing is it leads to new skills, and many students complain that they don't use their homework for anything. So would Catherine's example work for you? Do you think that that's the kind of thing that does count as deliberate practice because they're going to use it for something the next day in class, and they can't really do the class if they don't do it? Does that count for you?
Well, yes, I can see, needing to learn for the class, but that kind of goes along with the whole, this homework is coming from a class that, especially for maybe math or high-level English, where we're reading Old English, it's like, when am I going to need to speak Old English? When am I going to go into, like, a store and say, okay, the circumference of this can is so-and-so? And that's kind of where the whole homework thought comes from, too. It's like,
so for you, it's really important that homework, in order to really want to do it, you have to really see its point, and it has to be used for something. So a lot of teachers, I've heard this from a lot of students, that their teachers give them homework, and they check off that the students have done their homework, So you might say that it's practice in doing what you're told, but they never look at the homework or use it for anything. Do you think that that kind of homework really counts as deliberate practice?
See, when they if you're gonna count for if you've done it, I think that's all right as long as you check it the next day in class, because the point of practice is to say, all right, you know how to do this, well, we're gonna look at it in class to make sure you know it. But if you're just assigning homework, say just grading for if you've done it, and then like throwing it away or whatever, that's really annoying because I spent time on this. I put time into my work,
Catherine,
and
would you like to comment on that?
All right, there's stuff there. Now we're going to throw it away.
I agree with Ian on this. I think that if anything, the most annoying thing that a teacher can do is count a completion grade and then not even go over it in class, because typically when we do completion, when my teachers take completion grades, we go over it, we review what any questions that we have in class, and then if we do have any questions, then we typically spend more time on that subject and then try to move on from there. But a few times I've been given homework before, and the teacher takes a grade for it, and then we totally don't even review it at all.
Is there any kind of problem with doing homework, getting it wrong, practicing something in your homework, getting it wrong, and then what do you see as the problem in not having it be corrected in a way, not having it be shown to you how to do it right?
I feel like if the teachers want us to really learn this and they want it to benefit us, then they should make sure that all of us fully understand it, because if some of us are at the point where we do understand and some of us aren't, then what good is it to the half of the students that don't really understand and can't really
just to
tell
remind
you exactly how to do it
people
like 5 years from now.
Why we're drawing this parallel between homework and deliberate practice. A simple way to define deliberate practice is that it's the kind of practice we do that really has an effect on what we know and can do. And we may not like this kind of practice, but we can feel when it's working. And the cognitive research into how people learn all kinds of things, from chess to tennis to math to playing an instrument, has shown that these common elements are there in the way that people effectively practice. So I'm wondering if people in the audience have questions for these students yourselves. And Tammy, maybe you can point out people that have had questions or how to ask them if so. And I'll just turn off my audio for a minute.
Okay, some of the questions that have come in is Sarah asked, she was curious why everyone was there, what prompted them to attend. We had a lot of responses that came through in text chat, but I thought I would toss that back out for those that wanted to respond to that question. And while people are responding to that one, I'll go on to the next one. We had a participant ask, is homework necessary? And kind of in general, we've been hitting on it, but I thought I'd go ahead and pose that question out as a more direct question.
Thanks, Tammy. Do you want Catherine and Ian to comment on those things, or are you just want people to comment in the chat?
I think probably everybody. Go ahead and have the students say whether they think homework is necessary, and perhaps have participants indicate what they feel about it.
I'd love to hear from the students and the participants. Do the participants know how to speak up? Who is that, Ian?
Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah, I feel that homework is necessary, but if it's only necessary if it's going to help in the class, and if you're actually going to be able to use it in the classroom. if it's just something where it's completely irrelevant or it's just busy work, you have to get something out. That's really annoying, but it's really helping us learn, helping us move on, then yes, it's completely necessary.
I want to point out one thing about International School of the Americas. It's very much a project-based curriculum at this school. So the students have an enormous number of projects in their classes, and it may account for, some people are expressing surprise that both these students are fairly amenable to doing homework, and it may be just a function of the fact that when they get into school, they often have something real to do with it. Catherine, do you think I'm right on that, or am I off base there?
Absolutely. We start with major projects freshman year, coming straight into it. We take a class called multimedia, and that counts as our technology and our speech credit, and the first project that we do is within the first 5 weeks of school. We start on it. It's called storytelling, and we get with a group of students, and we have to interpret a story, like a child's story, and write our own script and make a play, and then create activities for children at a neighboring elementary to do. And we actually, after we rehearse and perform it for our class first, we actually go to the elementary school and perform it for a class of kindergarten to third grade students. And we actually have to help them try to better understand the story. And then all the way up to senior year, we take trips every year. And this year we're going to DC. And our project is actually focusing on a certain aspect of the 14 Millennium Goals, which, or 13? 8. Sorry. The 8 Millennium Goals, and which include to have more gender equality, and so we're put into groups, and we have to make a presentation in a couple months on these subjects. So I feel that projects are definitely prominent in our school, and that. Yeah, we definitely do a lot of projects.
And so does that somehow make tedious homework a little more have more purpose for you?
Absolutely, especially when all the tedious homework, if you would, that all the tedious homework is put together and is compiled together into a big project. It kind of makes more sense to have to do those things. If there's a reason for it, like Ian said, if there's a reason for us to be doing it, like in the long run, to be collecting it all and putting aspects of all of it into a project, then it totally makes sense to have to do the homework.
So, are there any, you want to wind up with any suggestions, Ian, as to how teachers could do homework better, fairer, and more in line with the principles of deliberate practice?
Yeah. One big way would be to ask your students what a good idea for homework assignment would be. Instead of just like assigning a worksheet or making them do something, ask, is there maybe some way that we can get you to learn, how to do a certain skill? And this would be a great way to get, homework assignments to be not just bearable, but fun.
That sounds great. Any other suggestions, Catherine, or any more from you or from people in the audience?
I think that collaborating with other teachers on which nights you're giving kids homework and how much homework you're giving will definitely help, especially with kids who are involved in a lot of different curricular, extracurricular activities. For instance, I'm in multiple school clubs, and I'm in a lot of things outside of school, so I don't really have a lot of time. And luckily, our teachers this year are very collaborative and only assign work that they're allowed to take up on different days. Even and odd is how they do it. So it's definitely very helpful when the teachers collaborate with each other to decide what kind of homework to give and how much homework to give.
So on our blog last few weeks, we've been having a conversation with various teachers who flip their homework, who send the lecture home and do the homework during class so that the teacher can supervise the deliberate practice and give the appropriate work, differentiate for where the student is. Other people have other ideas of how to do homework. I'd love to hear some of those from people in our audience. Great.
I thought I'd jump in. Oh, one thing that I noticed for myself is that it wasn't until adulthood that I realized how incredibly visual I was as a learner and how incredibly poor that I was as a verbal learner. And yet my son was the opposite. He was an incredibly good verbal learner and not visual learner. But through the process of helping him learn, it helped to really reinforce the idea to me that I think it helps students out a lot if instead of focusing on them completing a homework assignment in the form that it's given, if they actually, in a sense, have a research project running continuously that they pursue as to what works for them, and that part of the report that they give to the parents is what they've tried and some self-reflection as to what worked and what didn't work, and then give them some freedom that once they are starting to find things that do work, that they can modify their homework assignment to fit what works for them.
Now, that's a great comment, Tammy. Thank you. One of the things that I noticed, one of the audience members, is it Carla, who asked whether students preferred. It was Sarah. Do students prefer a set schedule for homework or random assignments? I mean, we haven't gotten to the question in this of the equity of homework for students who simply don't have time to do homework at all. And I think everybody that spoke with me for the Fires in the Mind homework chapter really felt as if homework was not the same for every student, but people needed to know what it was going to be in order to sort of brace themselves for what in many cases is an almost impossible task for students who have jobs after school, who have family responsibilities outside school, who for various reasons are faster or slower reasons or learners than others, or have other things that they need to be practicing other than the standard homework that's given out. This particular session with students is about deliberate practice, and I think that we're concentrating on whether it meets these criteria, and certainly geared to the individual as one of them. So I would say that the answer to Sarah's question is that overall the students that I spoke with for this book really did want individually designed homework, and that one of their big challenges to teachers is to come up with ways that the same homework doesn't have to be given to everybody in the class, and it can be really differentiated. And there's a lot of conversation going on that on our blog about that among teachers, and I really invite you to join it. Other questions I asked Ian before the interview, if he were a teacher, what kind of homework would he be giving if he were a teacher himself?
I said that I would probably end up giving homework that was based upon participation if they'd actually done it. But what I would do is I would check it in class and make sure that everybody understood the concept. So this way they're not stressed out about getting the answers right. But as long as they've applied themselves to it, even if they got it wrong, they can know how to do it correctly afterwards.
Yes, grading was very, very controversial among the students who contributed to Fires in the Mind. They were extremely opposed to grading homework, and I'm wondering if anybody on the board, on the chat board here, has any comments about whether there's a reason for grading homework, since it's supposed to be deliberate practice, not performance. One of the things that deliberate practice isn't, remember, is performance. What about it?
If you'd like to use the mic, feel free to let us know by raising your hand, and I'll give you a mic if you would like to, or you could use the text chat to answer if you wish.
People are saying no grade. Catherine, do you have a response to that? What do you think about grading homework?
I think that certain homework like math homework specifically, for the past few years, I've had I think 3 out of my 4 teachers, or 2 out of my 3 teachers actually have graded on completion and then gone over the actual assignment in class, and I think that's a lot more effective than worrying about getting it right or not, because if I were to not understand the assignment and then go home and try to do it myself and stress about whether or not I'm actually doing the assignment correctly, is a lot more stressful than going home and like trying to do it and saying, okay, well, I may not have gotten this one right, but I know that we're going to go over it tomorrow, and I know that I'll still get the good grade that I want because it's just on completion, and I know that I completed the work.
Oh, that's a great answer. So I noticed that we're running out of time, and I'd like to just make a couple of points here. This is such a rich and controversial and interesting topic, and it's one of those areas that teachers often feel that they just can't do anything about because there's this long, long history of what homework is supposed to be, and then other people say it should completely be abolished. So it's a very, very interesting debate going on, and I'd love it if you would join that conversation on the firesinthemind.org blog. And also, I wanted to say that this is just the first of a series of times that I'll be asking a couple of students at a time from around the country to join us and add their voices to the serious debates that we're having about all kinds of things right now in education. And I hope that you'll look for our Students 2.0 interviews regularly on Learn Central, on Students 2.0. And I particularly want to thank Catherine and Ian, who have given up an hour of their homework time to join us and really contribute their thoughtful insights into it from the trenches. And Honor Moorman, also their teacher, who stayed way after school to make this possible, and I think it's a wonderful tribute to a school that really takes its students seriously, and looking forward to finding more students. If you have somebody you'd like to be interviewed, please go on my blog and write me a note, and I'll comment on one of the articles, and I'll write you back and line it up. So thanks to a wonderful audience here and to all of you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Okay, let me go ahead and wrap it on up. I'm going to head on over to our thank you screen. We'd like to thank Illuminate, Learn Central, Bing, and Redo for allowing the platforms and all the tools that we need. Oops, I'm getting a little bit too far forward. Want to encourage everyone to participate, to join up in the membership at Learn Central, and especially if you're teaching online and are teaching using some of the tools related to basically educational technology. You'll find birds of a feather at Learn Central. And also want to remind you of the Global Education Conference that's coming up on November 15th through the 19th. It's going to be an online conference. So even if you find it difficult to travel, if you could just sit down at a computer, click a few buttons, you can participate in this one. Coming up, we have on October 19th, Nancy White on Networks and Communities. And on October 20th, Jennifer Fox on Your Child's Strengths. We want to remind you that we have some recordings of past interviews. We last night had Roger Shank, and you can just go back. If you go to the Future of Education, where they've got the archive for recorded sessions, we've had a whole bunch of really interesting interviews that you might want to go back and check out. And that's pretty much it. We want to thank everyone who came as a participant. This was a great audience. And next week, you'll get to have the pleasure of having Steve come in to lead these. But I found it to be a pleasure to get to jump in and be a substitute tonight. All right, everybody, thanks so much for coming.